Morning.
How's everybody this morning?
Excellent.
Great.
That exciting?
Happy New Year.
So, since we are on week number 30, but we happen to be starting a new year, I wanted to kind of review a little bit and make sure everybody, just remind you that you can go back and go through the previous 30 weeks. Does anybody remember what week 1 was?
Prospecting.
No, good call, good choice. Business planning. So being a new year in that we are, business planning is an important thing. And so if you haven't done your business plan, or even if you have and you want to go back and review again, go back and look at the business planning session and see what we talked about and see what we went over, and make sure that it's a live session, and make sure that you are where you want to be. Okay? Business planning is not just a one-day event. It should be a constant effort, something that you're always working on. So we have spent the last 9 weeks talking about contracts, right? We have gone in depth to the contracts in a way that I don't think has ever been done before, which has been great, because one of the nice things, and I need to go back and just notate what each class, what section of the contract we were working on, so that if you have questions, you can kind of jump back into that particular section. So I need to go back and just kind of edit that and note that, but we'll do that. So today's topic, did anybody notice what today's topic is?
Review.
When I sent out the thing this morning, I sent out a thing saying moving beyond the contract. So what does that mean?
Between contract and closing?
Absolutely. And what about, because we spent 9 weeks talking about how to write a good contract, and we talked about counteroffer forms, and we talked about exhibits and all of the details of the contract. But what about the actual getting under contract process too, right? So let's talk about that for just a second. So we write an offer, right? Now, if you're the seller side, if you're a listing, can you write an offer?
Say that again?
If you represent the seller, you're the listing agent, can you write an offer?
Theoretically.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not? If you have a buyer, and here's the tip, if you have buyers that have come back to your listing 2 or 3 times, but haven't quite pulled the trigger yet, write them an offer. Put something on paper for them to consider. Why would you want to do that?
Lets them know that you're interested in selling to them at a more favorable price than the list.
Possibly.
And it makes it real.
And it's real. It's something tangible. Oh, I mean, even if you went in at full list price and wrote them an offer, now they have a fiscal in front of them paper that they can respond to.
It's like trying on
It's just oh. So we write an offer. What happens? There are a couple things that can happen, right? Well, there's 3 really. But let's go with what's one option when you write an offer. The other side can.
Counteroffer.
They can counter. Everybody always says counter.
I was going to say decline.
You were going to say decline. Wow. Okay.
Accept.
And then the other more favorable desired hope is that they might just accept it.
Right.
Because if you write a good offer on a property, believe it or not, people do just accept them, just straight up. They don't counter, they don't change anything, they just go for it. Okay? So if they accept, what do?
You celebrate.
Right before you celebrate, you have to do one key activity that we talked a lot about during the contract
Due
classes.
diligence.
No, before that,
You have to get binding.
you have to acknowledge a receipt with binding, right? So you have to bind it. Okay? If they decline, what do? Go home crying? I
Right.
mean,
Send another offer.
You can send another offer.
you
or you
try
can move
again.
on.
You can either try again or go away. Those are kind of your two options. If they counter, what can you do?
Accept or counter.
You counter, you can do the same things they did, right? You can either counter, decline, or accept. So that kind of loops you back up into that world of the circle. If you accept their counter, what happens?
You have to find it.
Not you.
Fine.
They have to bind it. The other side, right? Because binding, and I'm going to say this as many times as possible in this series, binding is acknowledgement of receipt of acceptance. So the person that binds the contract is the person that received an accepted contract, not the person doing the accepting.
Right.
Which is most often a mistake. Okay? So now we're under contract, right? Now what do you do? I'm going to be very detailed here. Let's go through like a step-by-step checklist of everything you're going to do. Okay, so now you're under contract. What's the first thing you got to do?
Are you being real nitpicky? 'Cause-
Real nitpicky.
Well, you have to make sure everybody has a copy of the bound contract, because a lot of times what happens is the person who receives it writes the binding, but then
Okay.
they forget to send it to the other parties. I've
So
had that
you
happen.
can distribute complete copy. What's the next thing you should do, or simultaneous thing you should do? When you distribute that complete copy, where else should you send it?
Home base.
There you go. My home base. What else do you need to send into my home base besides the complete contract?
Your brokerage agreement, any earnest money, copies of earnest money checks, that form I was just working on.
Processing form?
Yes, the processing form.
Now, earnest money. Let's talk about earnest money. Where was earnest money? If you represent the buyer and you received an earnest money check when you first wrote the contract way back here, and you've been through this loop 3 or 4 times, and a week later, where's that earnest money check?
You have it.
It should be in the office already locked up in a box, right? You don't need to. There's no reason for you to hold earnest money checks. If you hold it, who's responsible for it?
You.
You. If we hold it, we're responsible for it, okay? So get it to us so we can be responsible for it. All right, so you get all that stuff into home base. Why do you put all that stuff into home base?
Because that's how it's processed now.
That's how we process it, right? Because we're paperless. But what's the real key trigger thing that you're trying to make us do? If we have an earnest money check in a lockbox, what do we need to do with it? We need to deposit it, right? We don't know to deposit it unless you send us a contract. How many days do we have to deposit a check after it goes under contract?
2 months.
5. But here's the kick. Do I take your check and walk up to the bank and put it in the bank? No. We have to scan it, send it through, so it takes a day or 2. And here's the other thing. If you went under contract and you went binding Friday morning, and you get around to sending me the contract, I don't know, late today, how many days is it now tomorrow?
3.
We're on business day number 3, right? So you gotta turn it as quick as possible. Now, when is that not the case? When is that not the driving factor?
Holidays.
When we don't have earnest money, for one, right? If somebody else is holding it. And we had a long conversation about who holds earnest money, right? Everybody remember? Okay. So if we're not holding it, then obviously turning it in doesn't drive us depositing the earnest money. If we are holding it, or we're supposed to be holding it, but you're talking it's going to be 2 or 3 days after binding before we collect earnest money, you still need to get it turned in. And then when you turn in the earnest money, make sure and tell us that it's under contract and associated with that property so we know to deposit it right away. Okay? Just little tips. Keeps us clean. Number 1 reason agents get license sanctions, earnest money. So That's why I try to give you as many tips on handling it cleanly as possible. What happens if the earnest money bounces?
Oh my
No.
We didn't talk about that, right? Okay. So what happens if the earnest money gets turned in? We deposit it. Accounting sends me a note that says NFT, no money.
Aren't
What do we do?
Aren't
Call
you,
the clients immediately.
We call the client immediately to find out what is happening.
aren't you in breach of contract? If it's said on the contract, the earnest money would be, aren't they, they're assuming it's good money. So aren't you in breach of contract if it bounces?
Well, technically the contract says what type of money it was, and so you would have marked a check. So we did receive a check.
Okay.
Now, in this case, it didn't have to be a good check for one reason or another. So as soon as we get off the phone with the client and know what our remedy is and what's happening, then what?
You need to advise the other broker.
We need to advise the other side immediately. We need to let them know, look, earnest money, there was a glitch, the account got transferred, whatever the reason is, hopefully it's legitimate and viable, it doesn't sound like a fairy tale, and we can explain to them that this is what's happening and we're gonna get this fixed, and we need to get that. Now, if in the case that it's gonna be 2 or 3 days before we get earnest money, what should we do?
Well, you can put on the contract that it's not gonna be received, because on the contract it says earnest money of this amount.
But this is, we've already gotten in and it's bounced. Now it's gonna be
Oh,
another
after
2 or
that,
3
okay,
days.
okay.
What should we do? You're on the right path.
You what?
New amendment.
No
Amendment.
amendment
We need
saying.
to amend the contract because the contract says, because otherwise we're in breach, right?
Mhm.
Because we've now said, hey, we don't have the earnest money we thought we had, but you were supposed to have it, so technically you'd be in breach. So let's do an amendment just so that all parties know. And that way, think about that from the standpoint, if you get an amendment signed by both parties, now they can't come back and say, oh, well, you didn't tell me you didn't have earnest money.
Right.
Yeah, I did. You signed the amendment that you know that we were getting it. So it's a CYA, it's to help everybody. Okay, we've got it turned in. We got everybody a copy. What was, when we distributed this complete copy, what else could we include in that? What's a nice form that we could include in that? GAR form that a lot of people skip. We talked about it.
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question, but that's. I'm
Important.
busy writing notes. I'm busy writing notes.
Dates.
Oh, yes.
There's an important date
form.
sheet, right?
Yeah.
When you distribute that complete copy, it's a great time to send out the important dates, because that makes sure that everybody's on the same page of when due diligence ends, when the financing contingency ends, when the blah, da, 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 all the different things are, right? It's just a great, nice cover sheet.
Are we under the impression that the financing has all been approved prior to going
Well,
under contract?
financing can't really be truly approved until we have a property, right? So they can be pre-approved,
Okay.
but we can't. So that may be part of our next step, right?
Mhm.
So after we get under contract, we've distributed everybody a copy, we've turned it in so the earnest money gets deposited. What are some other things that we need to be paying attention to? What's probably the fastest thing we need to do?
Inspection.
Inspection, right?
Mhm.
Possibly. No, sorry. That's on the other side.
Other side, we can be either side here. Let's play both sides at the same time. Listings and sales. So if we're buy side, we got to help the buyer coordinate an inspection pretty quick, right? I mean, what if we only have a 7-day due diligence? What if we only have a 5-day due diligence? We better get rocking and get that inspector lined up, okay? We may have already wanted to kind of touch base with them before we went under contract to make sure that they were going to be able to get us in their schedule. There's always an inspector. But, all right, so the inspection's got to be scheduled and done, right?
Mhm.
As far as getting it scheduled, who pays for it?
Depends.
The inspection?
Buyer.
Usually the buyer.
Buyer always pays for the inspection. Who goes to the inspection?
The inspector.
Inspector has to be there.
The buyer.
The buyer
Buyer.
oftentimes wants to be there.
And
Sometimes it's a good idea for the buyer to be there the whole time. Sometimes it's not. It's kind of a personality thing. Most inspectors want them to be there, especially at the end, to wrap up and give them an overview of everything that they found in person, as opposed to just reading off of the paper. So that's a good thing. And then, you obviously may or may not have to be there to let the inspector in. And you may or may not choose to hang out and watch the entire inspection.
Well, I've had buyers ask me because they couldn't be there,
To
to
be
be there instead of them.
Now, here's the thing. If you're an agent, or a buyer for that matter, and the inspector is going around doing the inspection, is there a need to follow them around and watch every move that they make?
inconspicuously, maybe.
I think it all goes back to how much do you trust your inspector, right?
Mhm.
If this is an inspector that you've used before, and you've done that once or twice with them, and you follow them around and you know what they do, is it worth your time to spend 3 or 4 hours with them, following them around the house?
Probably not.
Not really.
Not really, right? Because that's their job. Their job is to inspect the property. Do any of you know the difference between 220 and 440? Oh, good, we have one. 220. These are things that the inspectors are trained on. We're not. We're not professional inspectors. That's not our job. And so we need to be very careful about that. Because sometimes we get ourselves into situations, it's much like when you're showing property, right? You don't walk into the house and go, ew, that's awful. And you don't walk into the house and go, oh man, that's awesome. Because it's not, you're not buying it, right? Your reaction doesn't matter, so don't have one. It's the same in the inspection. You're not a professional inspector. You haven't been trained in building code and all these sorts of things. Now, hopefully the inspector you're working with is competent, and you will find out relatively quickly if they're not, usually. But, we have a list and use our people. They're good, and they know what they're doing, and they'll help you through that process. But don't get yourself too involved in that inspection. All right, what's next? Other than inspections, what needs to be done? And we're working on a timeline basis, right? So let's say within due diligence, you got to get that done, right?
You have to get your financing secured.
You got to start financing. Because usually your finance contingency says you're going to do application within 3 to 5 days, right? To be honest, for most people, application is pre-approval. It's basically the same process, so that's not really a necessity. But you do need to get that rolling with the lender so that they've got everything going the way it needs to go.
Now, is it when they do you do title search during due diligence? I know it's part of the
The
closing.
attorney does.
So that's not something
Yeah,
that we
not
can
our
write
attorney.
down. Okay.
Because remember, that's a one that even if it happens the day of closing,
Right. It doesn't matter.
we're clear. We're not going to get. Now we're going to have to spend money, but hopefully we think it should be relatively clear.
And wouldn't you want to, if the client wants to get a survey done?
We want to get that
Yeah.
done soon too, so we can order a survey at this point too. Who orders a survey?
The buyer.
The buyer pays for it, usually.
Depends on who's negotiated, but who's the actual person? Like, you're going to call the inspector and coordinate with them more than likely, although you may just give the names to the buyer and let them do that. Depends. Most agents will actually coordinate it for them. And then the financing, obviously the buyer's got to call the lender and make sure they got everything that they need, although you're going to have distributed a complete copy to the lender, right? To the lender. But the ordering of the survey, are you going to call the survey company?
Doesn't the owner of the property have to do that?
No,
So
buyer's,
anybody can do a survey?
buyer's agent should do that.
So an agent should call a survey company and order a survey?
Ooh.
No.
Close the buyers.
No,
Closing
finance.
attorney.
Closing attorney.
Closing attorney.
typically the closing attorney actually orders a survey. And so you just let the closing attorney know that we need a survey done on this property as part of the contract. Please get it ordered right away. And they'll get it done.
And is it then billed to whoever said they would?
It goes through the, yeah, it comes onto the HUD. And
So if it ends up going through to closing, it's something that will be paid at closing. But if it doesn't go to closing,
well, then that surveyor, yeah, that is
has to chase the money. Okay.
yes,
Okay.
eventually. All right, so we got the inspection scheduled and done during due diligence. We started financing. We're ordering a survey if we need to. Is there anything else that needs to be done during due diligence?
Appraisal. Financing.
Appraisal is going to have its own time contingency if you have a finance contingency.
Right.
And we're assuming, just so you know, we are assuming that we have a finance contingency and a due diligence, not just one. Now, here's the reality. If you want to write a clean contract, if you can get 14 days due diligence, you can probably get everything done in that 14 days.
Mhm.
You might not get final loan approval, but if you can get the appraisal done and you know from their pre-approval that the buyers aren't going to have any issue purchasing from the standpoint of they got great credit, they got money they're putting down, and they got, they're not worried about qualifying. We can get the property qualified in that 14 days. So now we can do a clean contract without a finance contingency. If you're in a multiple offer situation,
That's a good thing.
that might be a way to give yourself a leg up. Okay? All right, so what else do we need to do during the due diligence? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the inspection.
Oh, respond to the inspection.
The
Sorry.
amendment to address concerns, right? Amendment to address concerns. Does that need to be just presented to the other side or complete before the end of due diligence?
Complete.
Complete. It's very important to know. So if I've got a 7-day due diligence period, I get my inspection done on day 5, and I get them the amendment to address concerns on day 7, what have I just done to my poor buyer?
They don't have a leg to stand on.
I mean, more than likely they're in a precarious situation because they're not going to have the ability to have time to negotiate. So we've got to get that inspection done in the first third or less of the due diligence period so that we have plenty of time. Because it doesn't hurt anything to do the inspection on day 2, send the amendment to address concerns on day 3, have it back and negotiated by day 4 or 5 of a 14-day due diligence period, does it?
Sounds good to me.
Right? Why not get it done sooner than later? The faster you can get it done, the better. Okay? This has got to be done. Okay. So now we get through due diligence. We've done our amendment to address concerns. We've gone back and forth, made sure that whatever needs to be done is everybody's agreed to, and we all know exactly where we are. If we don't happen to get an amendment to address concerns done during due diligence, how is the buyer buying the property? As is, okay? Which may be okay, depends on what was in the inspection report, okay? Now we have the finance contingency, which also has the appraisal contingency in it, right? So inside the appraisal contingency, we have a time frame that we have to get the appraisal done, right? Some of this is not rocket science. But I want to make sure that everybody understands which time frames have to overlap and which ones don't. Because remember, due diligence, you've got to get it all done before the end of due diligence. That means negotiated, agreed to. Appraisal contingency. What do you have to do before the end of the appraisal contingency? Obviously, you have to get it appraised, right? And you have to deliver them the amendment to reduce sales price if you need one, okay? Obviously, if it appraises, you're good, no issue. But if it doesn't, you got to get that amendment to reduce sales price. do they have to respond back to you before the end of appraisal contingency?
So, yeah.
Mm-mm.
You fill in a
Remember, you have
number,
X
fill in a
number of
number.
days.
You fill in a number.
You have
that's
X number of days for them to respond.
If they fail to respond,
Then that's a whole different thing. But as far as our timeline of delivering, we don't have to get it negotiated by the end of the appraisal contingency. We got to get that appraisal done, and then we should get the form over to them. And then there's a time limit built into that as to how quickly people need to respond and all of that sort of thing. We went over all that part of it when we did the appraisal contingency. Okay. What about financing? What is your job? Let's go each side for a second. Let's put the buyer hat on for a minute. We're a buyer's agent. What is our job as the buyer's agent when it comes to our client's financing? What should we be doing?
They have to have, with that contingency has several parts to it. So one is just basically applying for financing,
Mhm.
and that has a certain number of days. And the other is actually getting the financing within,
Sort of getting, yes.
and I can't remember what the third one is.
It's two pieces, really.
Is it?
Yeah, it's just those two. So the question, though, is what activity should we be doing as an agent if we have a buyer?
Giving them several different, asking them, do you need help finding a mortgage broker? Telling them different people that you've used in the past, trying to help them. Sometimes they don't want the help. Sometimes they've already got it,
It's true.
CPA
So some buyers are going to come to you and they're going to be like, I've got my super credit union. I don't want to talk to anybody else. Okay, great. What do you say at that point?
Who are you using? And if
Who have you spoken to, and can I get their contact information so I can call and introduce myself? Because one of the things that's important in your success in a smooth transaction is having a relationship with all the parties involved. Because if you have no communication, for instance, if they were to use, Internet Loans 101, I always make up names because I don't like to be mean to people. I have a tendency to use real names and then get in trouble, so.
You're on camera.
I know, that's what I'm saying. So Internet Loans 101, which I don't think is a real company. If it is, I disclaimer that. If they were to use Internet Loans 101 and there are no real contact people, there's nobody to talk to, and you have no relationship with a person where you can physically talk to someone, could that potentially cause you problems during the process?
Really.
Absolutely. Because what if there's a hiccup? What if there's wait, that appraisal, we really need to, you're talk to the wall. I mean, there's nobody there. So you got to have a relationship. So you really need to do that back here before you even get under contract. If you're representing the buyer, you need to make a relationship with their person. Now, here's one of the ways that you can spin that. Because yes, as Carmen said, we do like to direct people towards Coldwell Banker Home Loans. Why?
Easier.
Well, I mean, the blatant reason is it makes our company money, right? And we disclose that to everybody, so everybody knows. But
We trust them
the
already.
alternate reason is that it will make your contract smoother, the closing process smoother, because not only should you have a relationship with the mortgage advisor, Lisa, here in the office, but I have a relationship not only with Lisa, but Lisa's boss and Lisa's boss's boss and the people in New Jersey and and so we can actually affect what happens and help, push things
Streamline
through,
it,
make
yeah.
things happen, do what we need to do to get it to go, as opposed to if you're with Bank of America, and I'll use them as an example because I have zero connection there. If you call me and tell me, oh, the loan, I'm not getting this information from the loan officer, you know what you can do? You can call them and ask them. You can give me their number, I'll call them and ask them. It's not going to do any different, right? Whereas if we're working with our partner, that's why we have a partnership. It's not just to make money out of it. It's to make our transactions smoother in those relationships. So it's important when that buyer comes to you and says, oh, I've got Super Credit Union. I'm not using anybody else. You can say, well, that's great. You know, here's my experience. My experience is that it's important to have a relationship with the lender. My other experience is that it's always a good idea to have a backup person in case that first line of lender falls through for any particular reason. Because let's go back to the appraisal. If we get an appraisal and Super Credit Union says, you know what, it's undervalued by $50,000, you know, we're not giving the loan. Well, the seller's not coming down anywhere close to that. It's not going to happen. So the buyer's going to have to lose the house. Or we look at it and say, well, wait, that appraisal's not right. There's some mistakes in there. There's this. So we can go to Super Credit Union and fight the appraisal, right? And how often does that work?
No.
Pretty slim. Happens. I know people that have done it. We've done it successfully. But it's a long and arduous, difficult process. And a lot of times the seller's not going to wait for you. Because they know, just like you know, that the appraisal's messed up. So what's a faster way to get that buyer into the house? Already have them in process with somebody else. Already have all their information in somebody else's system so that all they have to do is jump up, do an appraisal, and move forward. And hope that this person's appraiser is better than the last one's. That's a single example. Because it's a lot easier for them to come in and save the deal if they've already got everybody's information put in than if they're starting from ground zero. It's just that simple. You also get a second opinion. Because if Super Credit Union, they might be offering you the best rate you've ever seen. But what if they're charging you like 3 points over origination? Well, then you're getting taken advantage of. I'm not saying that they are, but they might be. And you can't compare if you have nothing to compare against. And so you always want to have those two to compare against. Now, the counter to that, I will say, because I think if they're going with Coldwell Banker Home Loans, there's no need to have a backup.
Right.
But if they're going with anybody else, you can use that tactic to get them to go with Coldwell Banker Home Loans. Now, our job is to try to get them to Coldwell Banker Home Loans to at least talk to them. It's their job to get the deal and get them closed. If they can't beat the rate, if they can't beat the points, if they can't beat the whatever, not our issue. But the reality is that you'd be surprised most of the time they can.
The other thing that I found, at least with one client, was he was so focused on getting the best deal, and that we were in, you know, we were buying bound and everything, and he kept saying, well, I've changed my mind, I'm going to go to this one.
Okay.
I've changed my mind, I'm going to go to this one. And so I sent him a very terse email and said, you have 3 days. You have got to make a decision.
Yes.
And then I contacted the one guy he'd been dealing with the most, and I said, you need to impress upon him that time is running out. Because he would have switched continually
And
until closing.
that is a
He
good
could
point.
have.
That during this, after we get under contract, that first start financing, they need to pick one and go.
He didn't want
They
to do
can't
that.
go multiple at the same time. Because then they're going to pay for 2 appraisals. They're going to pay, you know, you can't lock with more than one person. That's not a good idea. That's like putting more than one contract on multiple houses. Also dangerous.
Is it, and I've often wondered this, is it okay for us to suggest that they give their information to CDHL just in case?
Yes.
That's, I mean, because that's what
Absolutely.
I thought I would always do.
I mean, that's the thing is that it's a great backup.
Yeah.
I know that what she tells you is going to be true.
Right.
I know she's not hiding anything. She's just going to give you the best information, and then you'll know if
You have
you
something to
really can
compare
do
it
this or not. Right.
Yes.
And if she comes back and says your payment's $200 less a month than this other one, well, then you got to start asking questions.
Right.
Or if your cash to close is $2,000 more over here, you know, then you got to ask some questions. So you got to pay attention to those things. Okay? So during the finance contingency, we've got to get that loan commitment. That's that second part. Now, if you remember when we went over that, The loan commitment is pretty wishy-washy. It's a fairly, it doesn't mean that there can't be contingencies on the loan commitment as far as they need more stuff. But you got to prove that you're going down the path of getting the loan, and pretty certain that you're going to get there. So that gets you out of due diligence, out of financing and appraisal contingency. Everything's running smoothly. You got a week to close. What do you do?
Talk to the lawyers,
Call
make
the
sure
attorney.
everything is running
All the
smoothly on their
papers,
end.
yeah.
Well, here's the question. When should we have scheduled the closing? And who should schedule the closing?
The attorneys need to do the scheduling.
Oh, but somebody's got to call them and tell them.
Well,
Well, you have, it should stem from what you decided on the closing place, what it's gonna be. and who
Right,
closing
so
attorney.
in the contract, we
So then-
decided on who the attorney was,
And then
and we
usually
decided
that
on what
organization
day the
schedules-
attorney was. But who, which side, buyers or sellers, call the attorney?
Buyer.
99% of the time, it's the buyer's side. Now, what if the seller picked the closing attorney? I'd still, in my distribution of complete copies, I'd send one to the attorney and say, okay, I need to get this scheduled for such and such a date. And you can even copy the other parties on that distribution, the other agent on the other side. You know, you never send stuff to the other client. But the other, when I say the other side, I mean the agent on the other side. So you could copy the client, the lender, and the attorney. Not your client, the agent on the other side. And that way, everybody, you know, please get this scheduled. Bob, the lender, make sure we get this moving. We're ready to go. Because you got to schedule that closing up here.
the one that I just did, it was a builder contract. It was a new build.
And that's different.
And they didn't have any, it's already built.
Mhm.
It's like the spec house.
Right.
A spec house, but there was no date. So when we were negotiating, I said, we want this to be the closing date. And he said, well, we don't normally put a closing date. I said, but we want the closing date. And so since it was his contract, he amended the,
Right.
you know, before he sent it to me, he added that as a stipulation.
Well,
I
and that's because
didn't
we're
realize-
outside of our contracts at that point.
Yeah. I didn't realize that that was typical, apparently.
Well, because especially with new construction, it's really more relative to when it's finished
Mhm.
as opposed to when you want to move in.
Yeah.
Those might not be the same time frame.
Well, and the other one I did was a new build, and they were on a guard contract, so they had a closing date,
Correct.
and then they amended the closing date, and then they amended the
Yeah,
closing
that
date.
happens
So,
too.
yeah.
So, you know, I mean, but we got to get something on the calendar right when we get under contract because we need them to start doing their stuff, title search and all that kind of thing. Okay? So we got it scheduled. We can check, now we need to periodically check in with everybody, make sure everybody's moving. By the time we get out of the finance contingency, we should feel relatively comfortable about everything with the contract, right?
Mhm.
So what are the things that need to be done between the end of the finance contingency and actually walking into closing?
That we personally need to do, or just that needs to be done in general?
I'll go with either.
Okay.
Speak to our clients again, make sure everything is going comfortably for them.
Communication, lots of communication with everybody, right?
Yes.
I'm trouble writing that far down on the board. Lots of communication.
Make sure there's no hiccups on anything, because they need insurance, they need to make sure they have acquired their
Gotta get
insurance.
their insurance, make sure that's already been
And
done. We gotta
wired
get
money.
their wiring. What day should they wire the money to the closing attorney?
When the closing attorney requests that they do it.
But there's a certain time.
Isn't it 48
frame, isn't
hours?
there?
Should you wait, if you have a closing at 2 o'clock this afternoon, should you wire it this morning?
No.
No.
You should at least wire it the day before. Just so that we make sure it's there, everyththing's good to go. No
Wire
worries.
it and make sure it's there.
Yes, and you should confirm that they get it. So those are important. What else do we need to kind of be paying attention to during the
Oh,
right before close?
it depends on the way it's written, but if you, on your amendment to address concerns from the inspection, if there's things that they had to do, the time frame where those had to be completed might be within a few days of closing, 4 or 5 days of closing. So you need to check and make sure those have been done. And if you've requested receipts prior
Yeah,
to prove, you need to get those as well.
which you should.
Yes.
And that's part of that process. You're gonna check those repairs, do some walkthroughs, make sure everything's being done the way it's supposed to be. What else?
If it's in the Camp County watershed, because they're,
Make sure you get your, now that should happen back here under the inspections, the low flow.
But that's not in Dunbar.
no, I don't mean that, I just mean getting signed up with.
Oh,
Camp
yes.
Water. They
Yeah,
are
you definitely could get your utilities kind of rolling, because you can get them started before you even close on the house. You can get all your accounts lined up, and sometimes, depending on the water, for instance, you have to then go provide them with a closing statement and stuff, but others not necessarily. What else? Anything else?
Immediately prior to close, you do the walkthrough.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk day of close. We're gonna do that final walkthrough, right? We're gonna do that on the way to the closing. We're gonna go to the house, walk through the house, go to the closing attorney. Why?
Because if there's anything that didn't get fixed or.
Well, what if we've already been through, all the repairs are done, everything's good, everything's golden.
Well,
We
make
went through it
sure-
last night. Do we need to go through it again today?
Could have
Yeah,
been
make sure that the
vandalized
house is
on
still there.
Yeah.
Maybe they moved it out to something they should have.
Burned to the ground, somebody could have vandalized it, a tree could have fallen on it, you know, I mean,
The HVAC
knows,
was
right?
removed, like the one I saw.
yeah, HVAC stolen, whatever. So you wanna do that on the way as close to the closing as possible, because the longer the gap from the last time you were in it to the time that you close, the higher the risk, right? And so your job is to minimize your client's risk. It's always a good idea to do the walk on the way to the closing. Now, one of the important catches for that is if the listing agent is being proactive, they may have removed the lockbox the night before. So you need to make sure that you let the listing agent know that you're going to do a final walk on the way to the closing attorney's office. Okay? And so you want to make sure that that you work that out with them. And that's that cooperation between agents, because they may say, oh, well, I was going to get the keys out tonight. And you can say, well, I'll just bring them to the closing if you're all right with that. Or how do you want me to handle that, or whatever. You know, or if you want to unhook the lockbox from the thing, I'll bring it to closing with me if you want, you know. Those are the kinds of things that we do for each other just to make our lives less stressful. Okay? What else? So we're going to do that final walkthrough, and we're going to go to the closing, right? Do the actual closing. And after we sign, you know, the buyers sign 1,000 pieces of paper, our paperless society. Then what?
Writer's cramp.
You get the keys.
Writer's cramp.
And they get the keys.
Yeah.
Then what?
They get a big fat
Envelope.
envelope.
They got their, so you want to give them the closing package. And anything else that you might want to give them if you do closing gifts. It's a whole nother conversation, but we might get there if we want. Couple minutes. And then everybody parts ways and never talks to each other again, right?
No,
No.
Absolutely not, right? You gotta find a way to stay in touch. You gotta keep with them, okay?
What about the little gift that you give them? The nominal.
So the nominal gift that you give them. Let's talk about closing gifts. I'm not even gonna write it down. I hate closing gifts. I think closing gifts are just 99% of them are an absolute waste of money. Name some common closing gifts that you've heard of?
Tulips.
Tulips. That's a good one.
So when they bloom in the spring, you'll remember I was your realtor.
There you go.
Cutlery.
Cutlery.
Cutlery. Every time I take out that knife. It's not bad though, because it's got your name on it, and they are going to use it. It's a nice knife.
I've seen, I hunted for them online when I had my first
Oh yeah,
closing.
Google closing gifts.
And
You'll
one
find
of the ones
ridiculous.
that came up was a stamp with their new return address on it.
Yes.
And on the top of the stamp, it has your picture and your name. So every time they have to stamp it, they see you.
Yeah.
I
Oh my
thought that was funny.
That's actually not a bad one. Because it's something they're going to use. And
It just seems like it looks cheap and cheesy. It's like, okay, you just bought a $400,000 house, and I'm going to give you a $10 stamp. I mean, because I know there's an alcohol, it's only supposed to be up to this much, but you want it to look like it's worth more than that.
of course.
You don't want it to look like you went to the 5 and 9.
So here's the issue with closing gifts. The number one issue with a closing gift is 90% of them are used and never thought of again. So you can give them a nice gift card to a restaurant or Home Depot or Lowe's, or Ace, or whatever other home improvement store you think of.
Sherwin-Williams.
You can give them paint, whatever. You give them a usable item like that kind of comes and goes. And they're going to appreciate it at that moment. But 5, 10, 15 years from now, when they go to sell, are they going to remember that you gave them, a paint gift certificate?
It might backfire too.
Probably not.
My agent, when I moved here, gave us a refrigerator. And every time I saw that refrigerator, she did a horrible job for us. And every time I saw that refrigerator, I'm like, God, I wish I didn't go with her.
Hopefully, your clients don't feel that way about you.
Exactly. And then the refrigerator broke down. It wasn't even
So
4
some of
years
the
old.
creative gifts I've heard, for instance, I knew a client who their dream was to buy this house, and the reason they wanted this house was it had a front porch, and they wanted to be able to sit out on the front porch and drink mint juleps. So the agent put together a mint julep basket with all the fixings and glasses and everything so that they could sit out on the porch and have mint juleps. Now that's something that person will remember forever because it was tied to their dream, tied to why they were there.
Well, I did a photo book on the one that was a new construction where from the get-go, we knew she was going to build it from the ground up. And so it was all the way in Canton, but I went every 2 weeks and took a picture.
Cool.
And so at closing, I gave them a bottle of wine, but then that came in the mail like 3 weeks later.
Very cool.
And I got a fabulous thank you note from them.
And I bet
And-
they showed it to everyone.
And I couldn't order it till after closing because I wanted a
Right,
picture
you wanted
of
that
them.
final.
I wanted a picture of them in front of the house.
Right.
So after closing, we went, and that was the whole
Cool.
reason we went after it. That made a big impression, but you can't do that with everybody because
No.
it's not that worked because it was a new build.
But that's a very creative and ties into, and it's something that they're going to remember.
And it wasn't expensive. I did it through Costco. I mean, relatively speaking, it wasn't expensive.
Yeah.
It was less
No,
than
those
the
are pretty cheap.
cutoff.
Yeah, those are pretty cheap. And those are good. The other thing, I assume that you had your name and information in
Oh
the book,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. The last page is my business card.
So,
And then on the front cover, there's a handwritten note from me, and then my business card. But once again,
very good. And so that's the other thing that's really important is that whatever you give them, we make fun of the knife. But the knife is viable from the standpoint that it is a seemingly nice gift, can be relatively inexpensive but nice, has your information on it, so as long as it's not used in a crime, then it's a good thing, right? And so they're going to remember that this is something that you gave them.
I don't remember it being inexpensive.
No.
And now some of them,
Here,
I think you have to get like the little, you can't get.
those are expensive.
They
The
are
key
expensive.
The key is they got to buy more than one house to get much of the set.
I
And
ordered
so-
those and immediately canceled the next
morning.
Yeah, because
Well, I thought about the
I didn't
price.
think to cancel.
but I mean, that's the process. You got to find something that's going to have longevity, have some either longevity physically, something that like is going to be around, like the book. Picture book is a perfect example, or
Tree.
historically, memorially, for them. If it's really tied into their thought process and their dream, you're going to really grab into that. You can hook on to that. Or something like tulips, something that
Comes back
annually
every year.
comes up and reminds them, maybe get a little steak that says, think of me when you see me, whatever. You got to come up with stuff that's creative.
Narcissus.
Don't spend a ton of money on stuff that just disappears, okay? Because people get caught up in the, oh, well, I got to get them a gift. Why do you have to get them a gift? Does your doctor give you a gift after you
Yeah,
go to
it's called a
an
bill.
It's called a bill.
right? And is any other professional, is there a lawyer, is anybody else that gives you a gift when you use them for business? So why do we?
Tradition.
Because that's what salespeople do. They give their clients gifts.
So you got to tie it into, if salespeople do it, the reason salespeople do it is to get more
Repeat
sales.
business.
ROI.
So is what you're giving them going to get you future business
I know what we should give
or
them.
not?
We should give them a big business card that's a magnet that they can put on their car.
There you go.
Yeah.
Have bumper stickers.
I
I bought my house with Brett Duffy. You know what would be funny though, if you can imagine the city, right? If you had 60 or 80 or 100 of those tooling around town, it'd work.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're driving behind somebody and the next day you're driving behind somebody else, like, why do these people use Brett? That's crazy.
Well, you can always just go into a parking lot and slap it.
That's right. Exactly.
I would not recommend.
Or
I would highly not recommend that.
I bought my house with Brent Duffy.
No stickers for you.
Those Smith and Walensky iron welcome mats are pretty neat too.
Nice, yes. A nice
They
welcome
last
mat.
forever,
Smith
but it's. The
Yeah.
the iron ones,
Mhm.
you can
Nice, because you can customize it.
customize it with their initials
Right.
or whatever.
Things like that are timeless and usable are definitely good things. But it's important to get to know your client and know, is that something they're going to want? I mean, I've seen people get custom number signs for people's house.
Mhm.
I've seen people get, just different things around their house
Tiffany.
that were there for the years. Tiffany was a big deal. Like one of our offices even had a full closet full of Tiffany stuff, and that was the closing gift closet.
Wow.
I think that's crazy
What happened to that?
because I can't imagine spending that kind of money
I can't believe they bought a
for
refrigerator.
Depends
But,
on the commission.
it does. But I mean, again, I earned that commission, so why am I giving it back?
some of it back to you. Yeah.
Unless as a salesperson, I'm trying to get more business, and that's the key. So just remember. All right, any other questions? Contract to close. After the close, make sure you follow up. A little handwritten note could be 1,000% more effective than a Tiffany bowl. 1,000%. Now, if the handwritten note accompanies all right. Thank you guys for coming. We'll see you next week, and we'll do another topic. Find my button.